So you can do that on a hot air popper. You can do that on an oven top, on a pan. You can do it on a really, really expensive commercial roaster.
That's exciting news. I mean, people that are hearing this that don't have expensive roasters, that gives hope. Last week, I uploaded a video, the biggest mistake that a home coffee roaster can make, which is to stop learning. We have a great hobby. It's so much fun, but there is a learning curve to understand what's happening. And last week, I got a little frustrated because I realized that I hadn't learned or continued to learn like I could have. I kind of got comfortable with a certain type of roasting style and realized after seeing somebody else's roast and tasting it that was so different with such great results that I just wondered how that could be possible. And so I reached out to an expert, Rob House. He is a coffee consultant. He's a master roaster, barista. He has all kinds of credentials. He's written a book. We'll get to that introduction with Rob in just a second. But I met with Rob, and I invited you to ask questions as well in the comments this last week, and I would ask those questions to Rob. I'm excited to say that I got most of the questions answered during the video. There's a few questions that weren't answered, but Rob replied to those via email because we did run out of time. All of this is going to be shared, so stick around and wait till the very end because there's some really interesting conversation towards the end of the video as well. Let's get to the interview with Rob, and then I'll have a follow-up at the end with the additional questions and answers. All right, I'd like to take a moment here and introduce Rob House to the people here on the channel.
Hey Rob. How's it going?
So glad to have you here. Rob, I'm so glad that you're on this channel because you've got experience, years of experience. You've tasted a lot of coffee. You're tasting coffee right now, right?
All the time, yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So I guess just to introduce yourself to people, could you share a little bit about your background, how you started in roasting, your home roasting experience, your credentials, and then we'll get to your writing.
Yeah, sounds great. I got started in coffee just by being a fan of coffee. Grew up drinking it with my parents. Not great stuff necessarily, but definitely grew up drinking it, and then became a barista in college. And one of the shops that I worked at had a roaster. And so I vied my way for the chance to get on that thing and learned on an old Ambex 5 kilo, automated first and then not. And during that time, it's kind of segueing in between some of your other questions, but that's when I actually started home roasting as well, because I didn't want to waste the company's coffee, but I did want to learn significantly more than I was being able to be taught in the course of production. And so I ended up buying a little iRoast, which is what I started with, the iRoast 2. And then eventually upgraded to a Behmor, and then went straight from a Behmor to a 1 kilo roaster. And by that time I had moved to Portland, Oregon, and started working as the director of coffee for a coffee company in Portland. And partway through that, I decided that some of my findings would be worth publishing. And so I put out a book called Modulating the Flavor Profile of Coffee, One Roaster's Manifesto, calling it a manifesto specifically because it is my deeply held set of beliefs, but that doesn't mean that they're perfect. And that doesn't mean that they are scientifically proven and true and all this sort of stuff. We have been working on scientifically proving out some of them, somewhat successfully, and some of them we found that there's no scientific basis for, which is also fine and kind of awesome. I got a shot after that at working with the SCA and working as a consultant, and I've been doing that ever since. So since whenever the book was published, I don't even remember when that was, but at some point since before, so like 2013 is when I started consulting, so even before the book was published. I think it was published in 2015.
It was, yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, sweet. And so I've been doing that now for quite some time. And had the opportunity to work with people from all around the world and get to roast with a whole bunch of different roasteries and different machines and all that sort of stuff. But my heart is the passion for creating delicious coffee. So.
That's really the end game, isn't it? It's just to make a good cup of coffee.
Yep, absolutely true.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I was sharing with you as we were connecting and getting together today that the home roaster audience is really unique. I mean, I know that you're familiar with it because you are a home roaster as well as a professional. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, as I mentioned, like the Wild West. I mean, there's just so many different variables going on with the type of roasting styles, the equipment people are using,
Mhm.
and their education or their understanding of what's happening. So I think really, before we get into the questions, I just want to share with the audience. You mentioned your book. I've
Mhm.
got your book. I've had it for a few years, and the the book is awesome. It is so helpful, but even the last 5 pages are worth every penny of that book that you created. So, and it's in simple terms for people to understand, and you've created definitions for people so that there is a level field of understanding as you talk and explain about your roasting and tasting experiences, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you for that. It's very kind. Yeah.
Awesome.
Um,
So for those who are listening, you guys can find Rob's book online. I'll have a link in my description on my um, YouTube description if you want to buy it there, or you can go directly to Rob's site and get it. You'll find it online. So
it's
that's all.
around.
All right. All right. So Rob, I guess I wanted to start out really, I want to hit roasting, tasting, and then educational resources
Yeah.
for viewers. And so I guess um, one of the questions I've had asked from a popcorn guy, popcorn popper, is, you know, if you compare side by side a hot air popcorn popper with a drum roaster, what do you think is a better option?
Yeah. I
What
mean,
do you say to someone like that?
it's all about control, honestly. So, one of my deep held beliefs about coffee is that it's really about chemical reactions over time. And so it's a very simple heat application over time sort of paradigm in which I work. And some of the stuff that I've gotten the chance to do with like my friend Ann Cooper in Australia, where we did this awesome write up for Can You Taste the Roasting System, which was published by Roast Magazine. And the PDF is free online too, so you should check it out. Um, what we found is that the type of roast you're on doesn't really matter nearly as much, if at all, especially compared to what people think. It really has to do with, can you control the rate at which the coffee is being heated? In other words, control the events over a certain time period. And so that's kind of the big thing that I work off of. So whether you're on a hot air popper, whether you're literally just using a pan on an oven top, or whether you've got a Loring S7 like I've got sitting beside me here, during that whole gamut, you can really produce delicious tasting coffee on any of those pieces of equipment. And I'll share a quick analogy about that. So one of the people that I know in Santa Rosa, California, is the creator of the Hive Roaster, which is a little stovetop roaster that tries to incinerate the smoke while you're roasting. So it's a cool little setup. And it's like just a manual thing. You just shake it over top of the fire and that's it. And I roasted some delicious Colombian coffee on that from a producer that I'm excited to work with in the next few years. And put it on a table with a whole bunch of other Colombian producers that were coming in trying to sell us on coffee the next day, and a large importer here in the US. A lot of them were roasted on the Akawa. This particular sample was roasted on the Hive Roaster. And when they came in, the favorite coffee on the table was the one I roasted in the Hive Roaster.
That's awesome.
And it's just because it's simple temperature over time, right? Like I was shaking it, I was lowering the pan to get it hotter by getting it closer to the flame. I was bringing it up a little bit around first crack to control my development time.
Yeah.
And I got a really, really nice roast on it, like, 6 minutes to first crack, about a minute and a half development time to a nice end color. And
Wow.
the coffee just tasted stellar. And it's because it's temperature over time. So you can do that on a hot air popper, you can do that on an oven top, on a pan, you can do it on a really, really expensive commercial roaster.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exciting news. I mean, people that are hearing this that don't have expensive roasters, that gives hope.
Mm-hmm.
Right there, that's a glimmer of hope that it's possible. So you're saying that when somebody is roasting on one of these Hive roasters or a frying pan, as long as they can adjust their heat, control the pace of the roast
Mm-hmm.
so that it has enough time to dry, it has enough time to be able to develop the different chemical reactions that take place to develop these flavors,
Mm-hmm.
and then get into the development phase, that they're going to have a chance to have a good roast.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
the case of some of them, massive biceps as well, because holy cow, some of the home roasting methods require a tremendous amount of strength and stamina.
Yeah. I can't imagine a cast iron frying pan, right?
Yeah. Yep. Nope.
All right. Well, one of the questions that kind of has been asked, and it came up in some discussion, is the difference how you can have a good roast that is a 7 or 8 minute roast and
Hmm.
another roast that's 12 minutes and have the same as results or better results, how can you have such a different time variation but end up with such a good end result in both cases?
Yeah, and that's a wonderful question. Like long roasting versus shorter roasting, a lot of it has to do with the preference of the drinker, right? So typically speaking, I'm just going to like make it really, really basic. Shorter roasting tends to favor light coffee characteristics and florals. Longer roasting tends to favor heavier coffee characteristics and savory characteristics. So, like savory, you could think of like marzipan, nuts, caramels, all that sort of thing, kind of the heavier flavors in coffee, whereas the faster styles do tend to favor, in my experience, the more floral, tea like sort of characteristics. So, whether you're going fast or slow, it's really preferential for the user. The biggest thing is making sure that you have sufficient amount of time post first crack. That's kind of the real trick to it. Even if you do a really fast roast, you still have to have enough time after first crack for the water to escape, chemical reactions to happen in earnest in the center, because coffee does roast unevenly. Even in
Mhm.
the best machines, the outside surface gets heat energy first. Convection, conduction, and radiation all impact the outside surface first and then move to the middle. So you just have to make sure you give it enough time after first crack starts to allow that to penetrate in through to the core, to make sure you're developing the core of the seed as well, so that your whole bean and ground colors are within range. Yeah.
All right. So somebody who is roasting a short roast, I mean, all things, and help me correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
When it comes to first crack, you're roasting the same coffee. First crack, the temperature is going to be close to the same between a short roast and a fast roast. Is that correct or no?
Well, and that's where very fun things like thermocouple skew come in. So even on really expensive machines, the thermocouple isn't going to be completely precise, because it's not just measuring beans, right? You put the thermocouple in the bean mass, it's also measuring the airflow that's filtering between all the beans and some radiative heat energy. So a lot of times, depending on how well the roaster's set up, you can end up with a roast where you actually get to first crack at a higher or lower temperature, depending on how fast you're driving it. Generally, it can be kind of the case,
Okay.
but it really just depends on the setup. Mhm.
Yeah. So somebody who's flying through the roast, I mean, they've really ramped up their temperatures. They had a short dry time, and now they want to cruise down the rate of rise, right? They're going to fly through this middle phase and hit first crack. And so if somebody that's doing a slower, longer roast does that, you're saying that the temperature could be completely different when they reach that crack point.
Yep. Yeah, it totally depends on the roaster, but yeah. Hmm.
All right. All right. Interesting. That's good to know. So, uh, really, the shorter or the longer roast is a personal preference, whether they want a lighter body, fruitier floral,
Hmm.
or a heavier body, nuttier, caramelier
Yep.
coffee.
For
Yeah.
sure. And it depends too on the coffee and what the coffee can handle. Like if you're wanting to do a 7 minute total roast time on a low density Brazil, you're probably going to cause some roasting defects.
Yep.
However, if you're trying to do the same sort of roast with a high density Colombian, you're probably not. And so there is a little bit to which the coffee plays a role in that. So usually lower density coffees or lower altitude coffees will have a higher tendency toward roasting defects if you're roasting really fast. So with them, it does sometimes pay to slow down. Whereas with high density coffees, you can go fast or slow. It's really just dealer's choice at that point.
Gotcha. So if somebody was interested, and I'm changing subjects just a little
Yeah.
bit as far as roast times go, if somebody's interested in a espresso roast, then from a time standpoint, they would be better off considering a longer roast time. Or
There's the rub. That's where everybody has a different idea, though.
okay,
So
so personal preference.
yeah, very much so.
Okay.
Traditionally, you will see espresso roasts be longer and have longer development times, but there's a lot of people that break with tradition as well.
Okay.
Hmm.
So somebody roasting on a Behmor that wants to roast for espresso.
Hmm.
Do you have any advice for the Behmor guys that want to? Because there's been quite a few people ask me about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I used to roast on an old Behmor, but I didn't have the cool ones that you can do all the controls with now. So if it means anything to you, I'd say 114 grams, P2, B plus plus.
Right, for the
Uh,
time.
yep, exactly. And that would usually get me to hit first crack right around 9 minutes and have about a 2 minute development time, which was pretty dope on that. But yeah, I had to down dose. Oh, sorry, that was a half pound setting. So
Oh,
114
really?
grams, then half pound setting P2 B plus plus was my old Behmor recipe. So
Got that memorized.
yeah, they did it a lot. That's because I was sample roasting on the Behmor as well. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, you're usually better suited with longer roasting styles for espresso just to play it safe because the shorter roasting styles have a little bit more trouble standing up in milk sometimes.
Mhm.
So a little bit longer will get you to stay up in your milk a little bit better.
All right. So when it comes to the end result of the roast, let's say that a home roaster is trying to compare one roast to the next.
Mm-hmm.
Other than taste, would you say what are the measurables? The bean color is a measurable. Maybe
Yeah,
the
so color is king when it comes to measuring for consistency,
okay.
which is unfortunate because it's also a very expensive meter to get sometimes. There are some new color meters that are more affordable that are out on the marketplace, which are great. Um, and but basically, color is probably the dominant force in terms of creating consistent flavor. If your ground color, most importantly, is the same, then you're likely going to be the same. If your whole bean color and ground color are the same, then you're very, very likely 80% of the way toward matching whatever it is you're doing, even if all the other variables are kind of off a bit. Um, Weight loss measurements are great. Weight loss measurements are inexpensive and easy to do. Usually we aim for like plus or minus half a percentage point of weight loss variation. So that's definitely a great way as well. And then obviously tracking your chemical changes and stuff like that. So when did you hit yellow? When did you hit first crack? What was your end time? What was your development time? All those sort of metrics are free to take and also really, really helpful.
Awesome. Awesome. Great information. So somebody that's looking at color, you're not able to really discern. I mean, there can be obvious differences in color with the eye, but what you're talking about is special instruments that can get on a micro level and look
Yeah.
and compare colors.
Yeah, and a lot of times they'll be using UV light kind of spectrum. Some of them use laser technology, and some of them use various different kinds. But having something that is more oriented toward like optical measurement is probably better than the human eye. You can eyeball it and take a look, but it's not going to be as perfect. But that's one of the things where it really depends on how dedicated you are to it. Like if you're going to move toward professional, it's worth getting a color meter if you have the budget for it. If you're staying as a home roaster, maybe not. If you're okay with a little bit of variability in the coffee that you're giving out, or the coffee you're drinking yourself. So it really just depends on variability. But they range from like you could find a color meter for $300. You can find a color meter for 25,000,
Wow.
and kind of everywhere in between. So
Yeah. Awesome.
yeah.
I was watching one of your videos about air. And
Mhm.
so I had somebody ask a very specific question. How does introducing air influence the roast? I mean, that's a softball that
Yeah.
aims towards you shared a whole hour worth of discussion about this, but in a concise way, somebody who's roasting on a hot top
Mhm.
or a Behmor or any of these roasters that want to know when should they be adding air, should they be adding air, too much, how little, how does it affect the roast, all of that. Can you just touch on that?
So air for me is a lot more about controlling heat transfer than it is creating flavor. For the most part, I see very little evidence that shows that airflow differences within a drum from low airflow to high airflow are going to be sufficient enough to create any flavor difference. But what we do see is they're sufficient enough to change the rate at which the coffee's roasting. So usually lower airflow traps more heat inside the system, which helps the coffee to roast faster. Higher airflow drags that heat out of the system. Usually the heating elements or burners can't keep up. And so you end up introducing less heat energy to the coffee, which makes the roast go longer. So a lot of times what people will do is they'll use low heat at the beginning to try and trap heat in and force everything to go fast. Then usually around or before yellow, they'll introduce airflow to start the process of cooling everything down and then step their burner down to kind of aid in that. So it's kind of like drive really fast up front, slow down at the end is kind of the general gist of it. But I think that you would find it's less flavor driven and it's definitely more oriented around heat transfer control.
Interesting. So when somebody says that I added more air towards the end and I have, yeah, towards the last half of the roast, and so I have a cleaner cup, what does that mean? Have you heard that before?
Yeah, so probably what it means is that there's other variables that they're not measuring that are changed. So end color is probably changed. Usually, when you introduce airflow, it helps you slow down a little bit better. So you can probably keep your end of roast down just a little bit in terms of
Yeah.
your end of roast color and temperature. Maybe it helped them get a little bit better development time. Those sorts of things are usually changed as well. Most of the time, when someone says something like that, the profile isn't exactly perfect otherwise. So it's not like we had the same whole bean and ground color, weight loss was the same, we hit all of our target temperatures within our target time, and it's cleaner.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
mhm.
So one last question
Yep.
related to air and roasting directly. If we, for a home roaster, in order to measure air, let's just say that we are using it, we're using a lighter.
Mhm.
So there's a manufacturer that shows the lighter trick that talks about three different, like a straight flame, hardly any draw, a little bit of flame, and then a hard draw into the trier. So when you talk about air, I know in your video, you like to just have air set at one setting. I think that's what you said. What kind of airflow is that if you can use the lighter as the
Yeah,
example?
I would probably be aiming for moderate to high draw on the lighter.
Interesting.
But once again, and that's mostly because I want to be able to finesse it at the end of the roast. So if I'm leaving my airflow set, which I do for my medium and dark roast coffees, usually leave my airflow set stable because there's no reason to add a new variable into it. On the roaster you see behind me, the 3 kilo, that's full on 100%. And that's a pretty moderate to high draw on the lighter. It's not pulling it out, but it's close to. Um, Whereas if I'm doing my faster roasting styles or my lighter roasting styles, I'm usually using 50-50 airflow, 50% airflow, which is a little bit of a draw on it, and then kicking it up around yellow.
Oh, okay. So you are doing that because okay, that's the technique that I'm using for most of my roasts, and I'm roasting medium to medium light. Um,
Yeah, I'm
and
just at the point where it's like if you can roast the style you want without making an airflow adjustment, then that limits your variables. So,
yeah,
best
no
to do that.
surprises when you turn up your air, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Before Rob gets to the last segment on tasting, I just want to thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate it. The best thing that you can do is to share this video with other home coffee roaster friends, people that you may encounter or know in the hobby, because I think there's some really good content here that will help them. You can also help me by subscribing and liking this video. When you like this video, I've mentioned it before, YouTube sees that and they will recommend this video to other people searching on the home coffee roaster topic. Also, if you want to get notifications, hit the bell, and that way when I upload new videos, you'll be notified. So let's get to this last segment. And after Rob and I conclude together, I've got one more segment which answers questions that Rob wasn't able to answer. So you asked some coffee roasting questions, and he gave answers, and I will read the questions and the answers to you here in just a couple of minutes. So thanks for joining me today, and let's get back to the interview with Rob. So changing over to tasting,
Yeah.
the whole topic of tasting, because you've tasted a lot of coffee. I mean, your book, I'm thinking, you know, what kind of a caffeine buzz does Rob have today, right?
I got cranked out a little bit. Yeah.
I know you're not drinking at all. I know that it's your cupping, you're using the spittoon,
Yeah.
so to speak, right? So, what do you tell a home roaster who doesn't have the ability or understanding of taste? They're not sure what they're tasting. They're not sure how to describe it. Where do they start?
Yeah, well, that's the fun part. So tasting is a lifestyle decision, right? The thing that helped me learn how to taste fastest was every single time you put something in your mouth, you have the opportunity to think about it. And a lot of the times we put stuff in our mouth and we don't think about it. And so, like, if you're eating an apple, well, obviously it tastes like an apple, yes, but what else does it taste like? If you're eating grapes, what do those actually taste like? Because we talk about coffee, and then when we describe coffee, we rarely use the term coffee as a flavor descriptor because
Mm-hmm.
we're so accustomed to breaking it apart. And everything is that way: wine, beer, meat, vegetables. All of these things have the ability to kind of stop and think about them. And so, the fastest way to learn how to taste is just to practice mindfulness when it comes to flavor and really stop yourself and think as you're tasting everything that goes into your mouth, everything that you walk by and smell. Just slow down and think about it and try and be mindful of what you're experiencing. And that'll really, really accelerate things.
So, other than equipment, It's just a matter of practice and paying attention to different flavor notes.
Yeah, equipment, water is a big difference too. Brewing methodology, like all of it, unfortunately, impacts it and complicates things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You brought water up. Let me just ask, what do you do? Do you doctor your water?
Well, my preference is to use the water that the people that I'm selling the coffee to will be using.
Okay.
Just because, let's be honest, it's really hard to talk a bakery into putting any sort of water filtration in, let alone telling them, all right, so we want you to demineralize and remineralize to this particular
Right.
specification. It's just not going to happen. So I think from the business perspective, I prefer to use whatever water that the other people are using within reason. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if it's got sulfur or sulfur taste, then you're going to advise to
Yeah.
have some
Get
sort of.
that cleaned up. For
All
sure.
right. All right. Let's see. Are you able to modulate flavors in a roast without logging software?
100%. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's all about time. And so when you hit yellow, you don't need a logging software to tell you when you hit yellow.
Mm-hmm.
You can know, and you can write it down on a little notepad, unless you're shaking a pan, in which case you should probably just make a mental note or hit the lap button on your timer or whatever.
Yeah.
You can pretty easily track those things without logging software. Logging software is awesome, and would highly recommend it if it's something that's available to you with your particular kind of roaster, but it's not necessary.
If you just had any advice to share for a home coffee roaster, just general advice for people getting started in the hobby or wanting to learn more, what would you say?
Have fun with it. Nobody in coffee really gets rich, so if you're not having fun, you're doing the wrong thing. That's just in terms of the working in it side. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of really great resources. A lot of home roasting resources are probably some of the best still that are on the internet because they're very open about sharing. There's a ton of books out there about roasting that are coming out, and everybody has different perspectives, which is great. And so I would say read everybody's. One of my most recent favorite books on coffee roasting was Scott Rayo's second book on roasting. I thought he did a fabulous job with that.
Mm-hmm.
Really addresses a lot of good information. There's lots of free videos. I know Mill City puts out a ton of references and information.
Yep.
Sweet Maria's, the barista, what's it called? Barista Exchange? No. Home
It's the
roasters. There's a lot of blogs out there and a lot of
Exchange.
places to look. And then Roast Magazine has a lot of free stuff as well.
All
So
right. As far as anything paid, I know that you actually have some courses that you offer. I think you've got a course that's got a flat fee
yeah.
for X number of days. You want to share that real quick?
Yeah, I do a lot of roasting courses that you can rent the video for 50 or $100 or whatever it is for that particular video for 30 days and just watch as many times as you want during that and take notes and all that. And so there's a lot of video resources like that. A lot of people have switched to online, which is great because now you can learn stuff from people all over the world. My friend Ann Cooper is doing that in Australia, and Ann's a wonderful resource for stuff like that as well. Equilibrium Master Roasters is her company. And so definitely recommend checking that out as well. There's just a lot out there, which is
Yeah,
great.
there is. There is. And that's really, and it's cool. And that's one of my motivations in doing this is to be able to share information to the home roaster community, because there's a lot of good information, but there is some misinformation out there.
That's fair.
Everybody's an expert, right?
Yep, that's very true.
I guess even myself. That's why it's important to have great people like you to be able to give a little bit of a rudder in our journey, right?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I'll kind of leave you with, and with that is there was a therapy podcast I was listening to, and they had a statement that I think works really well for coffee as well, which is beware the tyranny of the one right way.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that have very strong opinions, and having a strong opinion is great. But even they will usually say, like, this isn't the only way to do it, And I think we get set in our heads a lot of times, like, oh, I have to do it this way because this is the only way to do it. And that's just not the case.
Right. Right. All right. That was such a great video interaction with Rob, and I really appreciated his time. I'm sure you did too. So the cool thing is that Rob realized that we ran out of time, and he took the time to answer the rest of the questions, and I'm going to share them with you here today. I think some of these questions, I know we have a full gamut of roasting experience watching this video, We have people that are just starting out in the hobby and others that have been doing it for quite a few years. So hopefully you find this beneficial. And so I just want to share a few more questions that were asked and give the answers to that. Forgive me, I'm going to read these, but that's okay. I just want to be sure that these answers, questions and answers are given, and you might find this interesting. So this is a question from Danny. Danny asked about fluid bed roasting and the differences between it and a drum roaster regarding heat transfer, efficiency, and duration. And so Rob's answer is, the major difference in my mind is that the airflow volume is tremendously larger than drum roasters. He did a video, there's a video out there on air that Rob did that's really good. And he said that there's 6 times as much air in a fluid bed roaster that is involved in the process of roasting than a drum roaster. This means that the airflow can have a potential to overwhelm the activity of the bean instead of allowing it to unfold more in the way it naturally would on a lower airspeed drum roaster. So there's a huge difference there. Additionally, roasting speeds on a fluid bed can be faster. However, all of them are very convective driven, including drum roasters. Drum roasters are all 70% or more convective energy transfer. So, Danny, I guess the answer to your question is Rob has stated the answer to your question. If you want to talk more about air, I would recommend you take a look at Rob's video. I'll put a link in the description below and you can watch that. It's really interesting. But people that are using fluid bed roasters, I think the nutshell there is there's a lot of air, a lot more air that's hot. That bean has a tendency to want to roast faster. And so you've got to pay attention to that to make sure that you're not roasting so quickly that the bean isn't roasting all the way through. Okay, this is a question from a gentleman named Mike who has a hot top roaster. And he's saying, I'm trying to figure out how changes in heat or airflow affect my roast and what should I see in artisan. And so this is Rob's answer, Mike. When you increase airflow, you should see the air temperatures decline. This will likely also be coupled with a lower rate of rise and a longer roast. Too slow of airflow and you can create roasting defects like scorching, and you can see the roasting go a little too quick. And he has a link to a video which I will put in the description for you, Mike, and I haven't watched the video, that talks about that. This could be the other video on air, but I'm not sure. Okay, the next question is from Dustin. Dustin asked, what's a good rule of thumb for drum speed throughout the roast? Is it best to start with a higher drum speed and slow it down as the roast progresses, or to start slow and speed it up towards the end to increase airflow and convection? So we addressed this in the video, Dustin, but he answered this question directly to you here, and this is what he says. Rob says, I would recommend not adjusting the drum speed at all during the roast. Best, in my opinion, is to make sure to have the drum speed as high as possible without creating a centrifuge or chucking beans back in through the exhaust. Drum speed changes the bean probe coverage and the conduction-convection ratio, and can cause unnecessary variability in roast temperature measurements. So in the video on air, again, you guys, this is a great video you should watch. Check it out in the link in the description. But he mentions to try to have that drum speed be enough where it's literally throwing the beans in the air, which creates more airflow around the bean, more convection type heating. And he also recommends to just have a fixed drum speed. So you don't want that drum speed to be so high that it's going to throw the beans and get sucked out of the exhaust, and you'll hear them kind of go into the exhaust. You don't want that. And that's it. So Rob says, thanks for all the questions, you guys. And again, I want to thank you guys for participating. I hope this was something that really helped you. It was a huge, huge benefit for me. So I wanted to share that with you as well. So thanks for watching. Thanks for participating. And we'll see you next week in the Virtual Coffee Lab.